I didn't tell anyone I was coming home. Not even Nolan. I landed at Dulles just after dawn, still in uniform, boots dusty from the base in Qatar. All I could think about was the look on his face when he opened the door. I even stopped for his favorite black coffee, 2 sugars, and those plain cake donuts he used to ask for when he was 7. The box warmed my lap on the drive to his house. But when I pulled into the driveway, I saw the porch light still on. Even in daylight, that was odd. His car was gone. I rang the bell anyway. No answer. It wasn't like Nolan to disappear without telling me, especially not today. After 14 months overseas, I had earned one thing: to look my son in the eye and tell him I was home for good. When he didn't call back after 2 hours, I checked the local hospital database through the secure portal I still had access to. Old habits. That's when I saw it. Admitted Nolan Dorset. Critical care. Intensive unit 4B. Admitting date. 4 days ago. My fingers turned numb. I dropped the coffee somewhere between the driver's seat and the curb. I was through the hospital's glass doors in minutes. Past reception. Barely remembering my name, the nurse looked up. "Are you family? I'm his mother." She hesitated. "He's in ICU. No one's come to see him. No one." She led me down a quiet hallway, and I followed the sterile white tiles to the door that separated me from my son. Machines beeped steadily inside. Tubes, monitors, pale skin. My Nolan. I turned away for a moment, trying to hold it together. That's when my phone buzzed. A neighbor. One photo. Victoria, my daughter-in-law, on a yacht in Miami. Champagne raised high. Laughing into the sun. I stared at it for a long time before I finally looked back at my son. He had always been the quiet one. But someone needed to speak for him now. I sat beside Nolan's bed, the chair cold against my back, the rhythm of the machines filling the silence between us. His face was thinner than I remembered, shoulders sunken, skin pale, lips cracked. I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, and felt the slight warmth of a fever that had gone too long without care. The doctor came in quietly, a younger man in blue scrubs who spoke like someone trying not to make eye contact with grief. "He's been sick for weeks," he said, flipping through the chart. "Symptoms started nearly a month ago. He collapsed at home and someone, maybe a neighbor, called the ambulance." I stared at him. "Weeks," the doctor nodded. "If he had come in sooner, we might have caught the internal bleeding early. He waited too long. Or someone let him." I looked down at Nolan again, trying to steady my hands. They trembled anyway. In my mind, I kept flipping through the calendar. Where had I been 3 weeks ago? Briefings in Kuwait. A final sweep in Kandahar. I had been writing reports, signing out weapons, preparing my team for extraction. I'd been proud, accomplished, but I hadn't been here. I had trusted Victoria to handle life at home, to care for the man I once carried through a hurricane shelter on my back when he was 5, to love him, protect him, call for help. She didn't tell me he was sick. Not a word, not a single message. And Nolan, stubborn as he was, probably didn't want to worry me. That was the kind of man I raised quiet, thoughtful, and too proud for his own good. I leaned back and swallowed hard. This wasn't war. This was worse. This was betrayal, dressed as trust. The doctor asked if I needed anything. I told him no. But inside, something was shifting. If she wouldn't protect him, I would. And I'd start by learning exactly what she'd been doing while he lay here alone. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in the chair beside Nolan, watching his chest rise and fall, my mind running through every year I'd given every deployment, every birthday missed, every holiday reduced to a video call. I told myself it was all for him, for his future, for the life I thought he was living. Around 3 a.m, I opened my laptop. It didn't take long. The bank accounts were still partially linked. Nolan had once added my name when I helped him pay off a student loan. He'd never removed me. I started scrolling. Charges from hotels in Florida, spa services, designer clothing, a yacht rental service, room service charges that read like fiction, $58 for a cocktail with gold flakes, hundreds spent on skincare and bottle service, all within the last 10 days. My jaw clenched. My hands stopped shaking. Then I opened social media. I hadn't been on it in years, but I remembered Victoria's handle she used to tag Nolan in everything back when they were dating. Her latest post was from 2 days ago. A luxury yacht, all white leather and polished chrome. She was leaning against the railing, barefoot, in a silk dress. And beside her, no mistaking it, was a man who wasn't my son. His hand was on her waist. She was laughing, head thrown back. Their glasses clinked together in a blur of sun and sea. The caption read, "New Beginnings." I stared at the image. Not one of them, all of them. It was a photo album of a woman who had already moved on, from a man who hadn't even died yet. I didn't cry, not even when I clicked save on every photo, every receipt, every timestamp. I created a folder and titled it What It Was, Neglect. Then I shut the laptop. My back ached. My eyes burned. But I knew what I had to do next, and the bank would open at 9. Nolan had always been the careful one. Even when he was 23, fresh out of grad school, he thought about backup plans. I still remember the afternoon he came over with a folder and a nervous look. "Mom," he'd said, "can you co-sign these? Just in case anything ever happens to me, or, I don't know, just in case." At the time, I teased him for being dramatic, but I signed. Savings account, medical forms, power of attorney. We filed them away and forgot about them until now. I walked into the bank at 9:03 a.m. sharp. The manager greeted me with the same half-polished smile I'd seen across continents. I didn't return it. "I need to freeze access to all accounts under Nolan Dorset," I said, placing the folder on his desk. He blinked. "I'm sorry. Are you?" "I'm his mother, and I have durable power of attorney. It's never been revoked." He asked for ID. I handed it over. He reviewed the documents, flipping through each notarized page. Slowly, his expression shifted from polite skepticism to something heavier. "I can initiate the freeze today," he said quietly. "Would you like to notify the other account holder?" I looked him dead in the eye. "No." It took 15 minutes. I watched every click, confirmed every account. Savings, checking, credit lines, investment portfolio. The yacht rental company had charged just that morning. It would bounce now, when he was done. I gathered the paperwork, slid it back into my bag, and stood. "She'll try to access it by noon," I said. "She'll scream. Let her." He didn't say a word. Back at the hospital, I placed the updated copies in a separate folder labeled Legal. I left it on the table beside Nolan's bed. I wasn't acting out of anger. I wasn't even acting out of grief. I was acting out of responsibility because someone in his life still had to. And the next person I planned to visit wasn't a lawyer. It was Victoria. I found Blake Winston's office tucked between a coffee shop and a failing art gallery. The kind of quiet corner you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. His secretary offered me water. I declined. Blake greeted me with a firm handshake and the kind of measured calm I'd seen in field commanders' men who didn't raise their voice unless they planned to end the conversation. "What can I do for you, Ms. Dorset?" he asked. I pulled the folder from my bag and placed it gently on the desk. "This is everything," I said. "Bank statements, photos, medical reports, social media posts." He opened the folder. His eyes scanned quickly, but I saw the subtle pause when he reached the picture of Victoria wrapped around that man on the yacht. He looked back at me, saying nothing. She left him alone while he bled internally for days. I said, keeping my voice even. She didn't call, didn't check in, just spent his money and posted selfies. Blake nodded, once. You want to pursue guardianship and financial protection? Yes, and the estate. She forfeited that the second she chose cocktails over care. He sat back in his chair. We'll start with emergency protective filing and a notice of restricted access. It'll take 48 hours to serve her. Maybe less. I'm not asking for drama. I said, I'm asking for dignity for my son. He studied me. You'll have it. Before I left, he handed me a duplicate folder. Clean copies. Time-stamped. You'll want these for court, he said. I slipped them into my bag and stood outside. The wind had picked up, but I barely felt it. By the time I returned to the hospital, Victoria had already called Nolan's phone twice. I let it ring. She showed up at the hospital just after noon. I saw her through the glass doors, hair styled like she had somewhere better to be, sunglasses still perched on her head, phone glued to her ear. She moved quickly, but not with worry, more like someone arriving late to a reservation. At the ICU check-in, she pulled her wallet from her purse and slid her ID across the counter. I watched the nurse glance at it, then type something into her computer. The pause was brief but heavy. I'm sorry, the nurse said. You're not authorized for access. Victoria blinked. I'm his wife. The nurse nodded politely. Yes, ma'am. But the access list was updated this week. You're not on it. Victoria leaned in slightly. You must be mistaken. The nurse turned the screen so she could see. It's not a mistake. I couldn't hear the rest from where I stood, but I didn't need to. Her posture said enough the way her shoulders stiffened, the slight jerk of her head, the flush rising up her neck. She didn't make a scene. But the moment she stepped back from that counter, she knew she wasn't in control anymore. 10 minutes later, Nolan's phone buzzed in my hand. I let it ring once, twice, then I answered. Marin. Her voice was smooth, casual, like I was a minor inconvenience on a Tuesday afternoon. He's unconscious, I said flatly. There was a pause. I was just calling to check in. She said, I didn't know you were back. You didn't know he was dying either. Apparently. Another pause. Longer this time. I imagined her standing in the hospital lobby, still dressed for brunch, grasping for something to say. If he were awake, I added, I'd ask him what he'd want me to do with you. She hung up without another word. I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket and turned toward the window. Outside. Clouds were building thick, slow-moving ones that dimmed the afternoon light. Behind me, the nurse who'd been monitoring Nolan's vitals glanced up. She was young, maybe mid-20s, and had barely spoken to me before. You're not what she expected, she said quietly. I looked at her and nodded once. She's not what I expected either. That evening, I made copies of every document Blake had sent. Not because I needed more proof, but because I wanted to be ready for what came next. The courtroom was colder than I expected. No noise. Just that polished kind of quiet reserved for things that can't be undone. I sat on the left side, 3 rows from the bench. Black suit, no makeup. My hands stayed folded in my lap. Nolan's dog tag wrapped once around my wrist like a silent promise. I didn't bring anyone with me. I didn't need to. Victoria walked in 5 minutes late. Designer heels, sunglasses pushed up like a headband. She was wearing cream. Maybe she thought it made her look softer, cleaner. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered something. But she barely reacted. She still thought she'd win. When they called the case, I rose. Blake stood beside me, calm and unshaken. He greeted the judge with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove and everything in writing. We submitted the folder. The judge didn't say much at first. He flipped through the documents slowly, eyes scanning receipts, reports, timestamps, medical charts. A photo slid out and landed near his hand. Victoria laughing on the yacht. The man beside her wasn't my son. He held the photo for a moment. Then he looked up. Ms. Dorset, he said, addressing me. What is your request to the court? Full guardianship of my son, revocation of spousal access to his estate, and protective oversight of his assets until he is fully capable. The judge looked back at the folder, then at Victoria. This isn't a financial dispute, he said. This is abandonment. Victoria's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The judge signed the order. Just like that. Victoria didn't scream. Not there. She only blinked a few times, then crossed her legs like none of this mattered. But I saw the flicker behind her eyes, the first real crack. After the ruling, Blake handed me the signed documents in a thick manila envelope. I took it with both hands and thanked him quietly. Back at the hospital, I sat by Nolan's side and placed the envelope on the table next to his bed. He didn't stir, but I whispered anyway. She's out. I hadn't opened that door in nearly 10 years. The key was still in the same drawer, buried beneath old spare batteries and a broken wristwatch. The hallway to the basement was dim and narrow, and the hinges groaned when I turned the knob, as if the room itself had forgotten how to let someone in. I built this space after Nolan's father died. Just the two of us back then. I'd work late into the night on intelligence reports upstairs while he set up chessboards and homework down here. It was where we kept the quiet things, memories that didn't need words. The dust was thick, but the table was still there. 2 mismatched chairs, a shelf of old board games. I found the photo we took one fall, him grinning wide with 2 missing teeth. Me in uniform with leaves in my hair. He beat me at chess that day. I never let on that I'd seen the move coming. I placed the picture down in the center of the table and pulled the chain on the overhead light. It flickered once, then steadied. I stood in that silence for a long time. Everything upstairs was chaos, doctors, paperwork, court orders. But down here, it still felt like Nolan, like the part of him that hadn't been touched by betrayal or illness or silence. And I needed that now, not just for him, for whatever came next. I sat down and opened my notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote the Nolan Dorset Foundation. Then I began listing names, pediatric nurses who had gone above and beyond, young patients I'd passed in the ICU without visitors. One boy in particular kept coming to mind. I didn't know his name yet, but he'd been in the hallway yesterday, watching Nolan's room through the glass. Alone, holding a sketch pad. I would find him again. And when I did, I'd be ready, because this room was no longer a memory. It was a mission. Nolan opened his eyes 3 days after the hearing. He blinked slowly, the way someone does when waking from a long, heavy sleep. The nurses called me in, hopeful, but as I stood at his bedside and reached for his hand, I could already feel it. He was here, but not all the way. The neurologist confirmed it later. The stroke from internal bleeding had damaged his speech center. He could still understand everything. He was aware, but the words were gone. The part of my son that once whispered stories and laughed through holidays had gone quiet. Maybe forever. He squeezed my hand. That was all he could give, and it broke me more than anything else had. Later that afternoon, I passed by the pediatric wing on my way to the hospital cafe. That same boy I'd seen before, thin frame, buzzed hair, sketchpad in hand, was sitting cross-legged on the bench outside Nolan's room. He looked up at me but didn't say anything. "I'm Marin," I said gently. "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Liam." He was 9. No visitors. No parents listed. The nurse told me he'd been in and out of foster care. Had medical issues no one wanted to deal with long-term. I sat beside him. He didn't look away. That night, I wrote his name down in my notebook under the header I'd created days ago. Candidates, Nolan Dorset Fund. 2 weeks later, the court approved temporary guardianship. A month after that, Liam moved into the guest bedroom. He didn't talk much, but he drew every night pages of birds and bridges and hands that reached for things just out of frame. Sometimes he sat next to Nolan and held his sketchpad up so he could see. Nolan would nod. Just once. That was their language. The fund launched quietly, no fanfare, no press, just signatures, a website, and a mission statement. For every child left behind in silence, I mailed the first check to the hospital anonymously. And then I sat with both of them, my son, and the boy who still had a voice. The house didn't feel empty anymore. I placed the medal on the shelf beside Nolan's drawing, the one he made in 4th grade. All lopsided stars and crooked lines. He'd titled it, "My Mom Keeps Us Safe." I used to keep it in a folder, tucked behind certificates and deployment letters. Now it sat out in the open, framed next to something I'd earned the hard way. The television was on in the background, low volume. No one really watching. A news ticker scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Local woman files for bankruptcy amid court ruling. Victoria's last name was misspelled. But the photo was unmistakable, taken years ago at some gala she never invited Nolan to. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. This wasn't a victory. It was a correction, a redirection, a way back to the life I'd spent too many years assuming would wait for me. From the living room, I heard the sound that had started showing up more often. Nolan humming, just a thread of melody. Off-key and faint. His speech wasn't coming back. The doctors had said, but the music sometimes slipped through. Liam sat beside him on the couch, legs tucked under, drawing something with sharp, steady lines. They looked content, not healed, not whole, but steady. I walked past them into the kitchen and opened my laptop. There were forms to review, letters to send. The fund was growing faster than expected. Donations were already coming in quietly, mostly from other veterans, nurses, people who had lived through something and recognized the signs. I wasn't a soldier anymore. I wasn't returning to base. There were no flags, no salutes, no exit briefing, but I was still serving. I closed the laptop and poured 2 mugs of coffee. Set one beside Nolan, who blinked and looked up. Then I handed a pen to Liam. "There's more to draw," I said, and this time, I sat down with them,